Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Assassin's Creed 2 for PC, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Mac. This review is coming to you courtesy of Fusion Bunny. He sent me this, so thank you. It is greatly appreciated. This is the follow-up to Assassin's Creed. It was developed by Ubisoft Montreal and released in November of 2009, first for consoles, then the following year for PC. And then eventually it got a Mac release as well. And it should be noted that I thought that Assassin's Creed 1 was not a particularly good game in and of itself, but it was a cool idea and they could definitely expound upon it and improve it later. It just had a lot of problems in it. And you can watch my review of that if you want. But the real question here is, did Assassin's Creed 2 improve upon what the original did, or did they just kind of replicate that and not really do anything with it, or what happened? Well, as far as the presentation goes, they did up the ante a bit in this one. While it doesn't look that much different from the original Assassin's Creed, the textures are sharper, the modeling's better, the animations are smoother and more fluid. And so it actually creates a much better visual feel in this one than it did in the original game. And it really does help that they went all out on really driving home this whole historical setting. You're running across Italy in the 1400s, and it really does come alive in this game. Down to just walking around the streets, and people are talking to each other, people are going about their daily business. You're going along and seeing all these historical buildings in their glory, really. And so, for someone who's a bit of a history nerd like me, it's of course a great thing. But that said, even though it does look better than the original Assassin's Creed, it certainly doesn't run better. And I don't really know why it doesn't run better. I guess it's just not as well optimized, because I will notice frame rate drops occasionally, there's occasional stuttering, but luckily it's not so bad that it becomes a problem. Now, it is a console port, and it is, of course, letterboxed, which is kind of annoying. But other than that, most of the graphics are okay. Now, there is occasionally the over-insistence upon a bit of bloom lighting, but they actually toned it down quite a bit compared to a lot of other games out there right now, so that's a plus. But what about the sound design? Well, the sound effects themselves do their job very well, in fact, and they're very good sound effects. Particularly when you get into melee fights, where everything sounds very just in your face and almost brutal. Particularly when you're doing the counters and just annihilating your foes and such. So they did a good job with that. And it really does blend together with the environment quite well as well. So that really does create more authenticity to it. The music is actually very well done. It's by Jesper Kyd, and it fits the game really well, despite being this kind of mix of modern and more classical kind of elements. They throw in a lot of guitarish kind of stuff, along with some more old orchestral styling to it, as well as electronic stuff. And so it's kind of a weird mix, but it works really well in the game's favor, because it's a surprisingly memorable and catchy soundtrack. And it generally fits whatever you're doing, so of course when that happens, you gotta like it, right? Well, then there's the voice acting, which is kind of hit or miss. On the one hand, I don't like the voice of Ezio himself, the guy you're playing as. He really seems like just somebody trying to emulate an Italian accent, and it really doesn't come across very well at all. Some of the other characters are like that as well, and their accents aren't necessarily proper for where they're from or something like that. But the lines themselves are well played, and the characters themselves are well played. So they've done a good job with that, but like I said, the accents are off sometimes. And it can get slightly annoying sometimes, but for the most part, you can put up with it just fine, and the voice acting never becomes a problem. They certainly don't have any really odd line readings or anything like that. They do their job quite well. But what really matter are the story and the gameplay, and this thing has two parallel storylines. The first is, of course, the overarching Assassin's Creed storyline, which, if you know from my review of the original game, is pretty stupid. You're playing as Desmond Miles, and he's basically reliving the memories of his ancestors through his DNA in this machine called the Animus at Abstergo. And Abstergo is a front for the Knights Templar, who are evil and want to control the world. Whereas the Assassins are the good guys. They want to obviously stop the Templars from doing that, but they want to basically keep humans free, effectively. Well, when you get to the other storyline in this game, you're playing as Ezio Auditore da Firenze, who is one of Desmond's ancestors, and of course the assassin that you're playing throughout the entire game. And that's just Desmond reliving these memories through the Animus. Now, it's worth noting that the bits with Desmond actually don't happen all that much. There's only a handful of spots in the game where it actually takes you out of the action in Ezio's storyline and puts you back into the shoes of Desmond himself, just going around talking to people and not being in the Animus, basically. Now, the basic idea is that he has escaped from Abstergo with the help of Lucy, and they've gone back to the other assassins in order to relive these memories and basically find a way to stop the Templars. That's pretty much it. Although it does end up going more into the whole aliens, oh my god thing, which gets really annoying, but luckily, again, there's few parts of that throughout the entire game. And so what you're going to be focusing on is, of course, the story of Ezio. He is born into a effectively noble family, the Auditores, in Florence. That's Firenze. And he's basically a Casanova. He goes around and he's very popular with the ladies, so to speak. He's kind of brash and almost arrogant. He's kind of an ass, really. And, of course, he's just kind of living it up in Florence and doing his own thing. And then, all of a sudden, his life changes dramatically when his father and brothers are murdered, effectively. They're executed. And Ezio has to basically don his father's armor and go off and find out why they were framed for things, why they were effectively betrayed and murdered, and then it leads into a more complex plot involving, of course, the Templar Order and their machinations in Renaissance Italy. It's pretty interesting, actually, going through this whole thing, because you're dealing with a lot of historical figures, and they're played about like what you'd expect from having read up on the characters themselves. Now, obviously, there's a lot of license here because it is, of course, a video game, and they are, of course, working it into such an absurd storyline. But it's nice having characters that actually have character. Leonardo da Vinci, for instance, he's rather eccentric. He's excitable whenever it comes to anything just technical or some sort of mystery or anything like that. He's actually a really fun character. And you have all these other characters as well that really give this game a lot of life. Whereas in the previous game, there was effectively no character in the entirety of it. Desmond had the personality of a piece of tissue paper. Altair had no personality at all. He was just blank. And none of the other characters you were interacting with had any personality either. Whereas you go to Assassin's Creed 2, they actually have emotions, they have goals, they have aspirations, and they interact with each other. They become friends, and you see them become friends, and how their friendship develops, and stuff like that. And Ezio himself grows as a character throughout the entire game. It takes place over several years. And again, he starts off as this rather brash and arrogant kind of character, and he matures over time and becomes more intelligent and pretty much more sensitive, actually. And it's kind of cool to see this happen because, again, Altair didn't have a personality at all. And then you get to Ezio, and as he uncovers more about his destiny, effectively, as an assassin, he becomes just a better character throughout the entirety of it, and he becomes likable, which is something that nothing in the previous game had. And so these plots are really the interesting part of the Ezio storyline, although it does tie into the whole aliens and pieces of Eden thing going on, which ends up being kind of dumb, and you just sit there going, huh? But the rest of the Ezio storyline is actually very interesting and rather engrossing. Now, that said, what about the gameplay? Because the gameplay was one of the biggest issues I had with the original game. It had a bunch of cool ideas, and none of them really worked out. You had parkour, but it was kind of sluggish and you didn't really feel all that responsive. You had the combat system basically ending up being hold the button to go into high profile action, and then you press the counter button, and then you win. And that was pretty much it, actually. There wasn't really any sneaking involved. It would occasionally blend with the crowd, but it was kind of goofy the way you did that. And so how did they take all that and change it up in Assassin's Creed 2 if they did it at all? Well, they did change it, and there are a lot of improvements. Let's put it that way. I'm going to start with the movement. Ezio moves a lot more smoothly than Altair ever did. And he's just... it's almost like he's a monkey climbing up the walls of things and just really quickly and smoothly, and transitioning to pieces of that he can latch onto very, very easily. And it's actually very nice, because then the parkour doesn't really become a chore like it did in the original game. And it's particularly nice when you get the ability to launch yourself pretty high, actually, and actually scale the really tall buildings. So that actually becomes a pretty cool feature, and it works out pretty well in the game's favor. Now, you do only get the ability to launch yourself really high when you've played through quite a bit of the game, actually. But other than that, the movement feels a lot better in this game. There's also the change in blending with the crowd. In the original game, you would hold a button and it would make you move really slowly. And the guards wouldn't really pay much attention to you. They've removed that entirely from this game. And instead, you actually have to blend with the crowd. As in, you go into the crowd, and once you've managed to get in with the crowd enough, you'll effectively go incognito. And you have to actually move with the crowd and not outpace them and everything, otherwise you get spotted and everything. It actually works out really well, except for being on PC with keyboard and mouse. You have only a very specific speed you can walk at with the keyboard, so I get the feeling this game would be a lot better with a gamepad, because not only the keeping pace with the crowd and everything, but when you're doing the parkour, occasionally you'll try to make a jump, and instead of jumping the direction that you basically think you tell him to jump, he'll actually jump at a diagonal angle, which in turn will make you go, instead of jumping from rooftop to rooftop, you've now jumped into the middle of the street, which gets really annoying, particularly when you're trying to chase somebody down. And so the game actually has a weird way of doing that, and I feel like it would be much better with a gamepad, because then you'd have that analog control. That said, it works pretty well with keyboard and mouse for the most part. Once you get used to really being very specific on how you move, it's not that big of a problem. Now, apart from movement, they did change up the combat a bit. They tried to make it more involving and more difficult, I guess, but they didn't really succeed in that regard. It's still press counter button to win, but this time you actually have to change up your tactics, so to speak, depending on what you're fighting. Now, there are certain characters in the game who have heavier armor than others, and so with some of them you can just use the hidden blades, counter with those, and then insta-gib them. Or with the heavy plate armor wearing enemies, you can actually, when you counter, if you're using just your fists, then you can actually snatch their weapon out of their hands and then just beat them with it. And of course that's a big heavy weapon too, so once you're done using it, Ezio actually just drops it. So they do spice up the combat a bit, but it's really not that much different from the original game. They did add in more toys to play with, and that would be stuff like the dual hidden blades as opposed to just a hidden blade, as well as a poison upgrade for the hidden blades where you can just go up and poison your enemies. You actually get a hidden pistol at one point, and you're just sitting there like, what? Because if you know anything about firearms from this era, they kind of sucked. And so a hidden pistol would just kind of be ridiculous. But it gives you one anyway. You also get access to lots of different swords and daggers in this game. You can actually buy them at blacksmiths throughout the entire game. And each of them has their own stats. Some of them will do more damage, some of them are faster, some of them are better at blocking. And so it gives you incentive to actually use the florins you get in the game to actually purchase things that are useful to you. You can also upgrade your armor as you go through the game. You starting with, of course, leather, and then moving on up to metal armors. And you can also get the armor of Altair if you go and find all the assassin tombs and find the, I think they're called sigils or something like that, that are in those tombs. And it gives you a lot of side activities to do that'll help increase your florins, so you'll never worry about money. But it gives you a lot of upgrades that you can purchase throughout the game. And some of them aren't even really upgrades. For instance, you can go and to a tailor, and then you can not only buy larger pouches for your equipment, but you can also just dye your clothing. And that's actually just a welcome change of customization. And it's completely optional. You don't have to do it, obviously. In fact, most of the stuff in this game is optional, which is kind of surprising. You don't necessarily have to upgrade your armor if you don't want to, but it's advisable to. You can also go around and find doctors that will heal you. You can do all sorts of mini-games. And unlike in the original game, where you had to do a bunch of mini-games in order to gather intel on your target, in this one, you don't have to do the mini-games at all. Although there are a few spots in the actual story missions where it will effectively do the mini-games in those missions themselves, but they're not necessarily the mini-games themselves. And so that's a much welcome change of pace, because the mini-games in the original game were actually rather annoying. There's also, of course, collectibles. You can go around finding feathers if you want. You can go around buying all sorts of paintings for Monteriggioni. My Italian's terrible. But it's this estate that your family owns. And as you purchase more equipment, purchase paintings, and go in, of course, upgrade things with the architect, the value of the city increases, and you'll get more florins from it on I think it's a 20-minute basis. And so that's a big source of florins right there. And so you also have to go back there in order to basically access the armor of Altair and everything like that as well. So it gives you a lot of things to do, and they do have a fast travel system in this one, unlike in the original game. So you no longer have to run from point A to point B. You now can go find a fast travel station and go pretty much anywhere you need to go. Now, it does make you go, if you go into a city, it has certain waypoints that you can go to, and then you have to go from there to find whatever you're trying to go to. But it's really nice not having to just go from city to city on horseback or something like that. And so that fast travel system comes in really handy, particularly when you're going back to the villa and getting your allowance of florins, effectively. Now, the question is, though, does all of this really play out better in the game? I mean, they did add in quite a few new features and new elements to make it more stealthy than the previous game. I mean, you can use coins to distract your enemies. You can throw smoke up to distract them as well and escape and stuff like that. But there's really not any sneaking in this game. Most of the time you're going to want to move on the rooftops because it's much, much quicker than moving around in the streets. And obviously in doing that, you're going to run into a lot of archers. And that gets kind of annoying, actually. And so when you have that problem, it just wears on you after a while. The combat wears on you after a while. And for a game that's pretty much about stealth, there's really not a lot of stealth in it. And while it does give you the more stealthy abilities, most of the time you're going to end up fighting anyway, and there's really no penalty for it. Except for in certain circumstances where they enforce this arbitrary don't get spotted thing, which is just annoying. It always has been, it always will be. Now that said, Assassin's Creed 2 is a definite improvement over Assassin's Creed 1. There is no question of that. It has actual character to it. It feels like the developers actually cared. And they looked at what the original game did and said, okay, what works and what doesn't? And they kept what works. And they improved upon it. And for the stuff that didn't, they tried to refine it. And in some cases, they were successful, in others not so much. Like the combat, for instance, they weren't very successful in that. But other things that they've done in the game, it actually blends together quite well to make a pretty good game, actually. Despite wearing on you after a while. It is a long game, which surprised me. And so, when you have such a long game and it only wears on you toward the end, that's a good thing. It could have been a bit shorter, which it may seem to you like, what? But you usually complain about things being too short. Well, in this case, things kind of outstay their welcome. It doesn't go too far with it, but they kind of outstay their welcome. And if you have a problem like I do, where on PC it relies on cloud saving, and the game decides to crash on you, and oh look, it didn't save your files to the cloud, so even though you've got the saves on your system itself, it's not going to read those, and only read the ones that were 3 hours earlier in the cloud. When you have problems like that, that gets kind of annoying. So, obviously, the console version is going to be the better of the versions. I mean, you don't have to worry about optimization problems, you don't have to worry about control issues, you don't have to worry about the cloud saving problem. And you certainly don't have to worry about the DRM practices that Ubisoft has done with this thing. But on PC, it's still not bad. It's a pretty good game. Is it amazing? Definitely not. But it's a welcome change of pace from the original game. It is definitely an improvement. And it makes me want to see where they go with it. If they improve upon what the second game does well. And I mean, as in the original game, it's just really fun to run around this historical setting that comes alive. And it really gives you this cities that really do come alive and feel like they're actual cities and places in history rather than just a setting for a game. Ultimately, I give Assassin's Creed 2 a 3.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.